Jake Donnelly wasn't the kind of man to lose sleep over neighborhood politics. He liked clean lines, quiet mornings, and the kind of privacy that let you drink coffee in boxers on your own back porch. That's why, when he designed and built the sleek, modern guest house behind his main home in Willow Ridge, he thought nothing of it. He had the permits, he paid the fees, and frankly, he didn't give a damn what anyone thought. But someone did. It was a Wednesday, hot, muggy, and still. Jake stepped out to grab his paper when he noticed the bright orange notice taped across the front gate. The words cease and desist, unauthorized structure, screamed in block print. His brow twitched. His pulse didn't. This wasn't the city. It was the HOA. A silver Prius crept up the street and stopped right in front of his driveway. Out stepped a short man with mirrored sunglasses and a clipboard, walking like he had a badge and a mission. "Mr. Donnelly," he chirped. "Howard Thresher. I'm the acting president of the Willow Ridge HOA. We need to talk about your..." He glanced over Jake's shoulder. "Illegal structure." Jake stared at him, silent. Then, "That structure has a permit number. County stamped. Want a copy?" Howard smiled the way a mall cop might smile at a Lamborghini parked across the lines. "Let's not make this adversarial," he said. "The HOA has design guidelines. This guest house violates the community aesthetic. We consider it non-compliant." Jake took a slow breath. "Your guidelines don't override the county building code." "That may be, but our members have voted to begin fining you. $500 a day, effective immediately." Jake blinked once. No emotion. Then he said, "You know what's funny, Howard?" "What's that?" "I actually thought you were delivering mail." And he shut the door. In his face, that night, Jake didn't sleep. Not because he was worried, but because he was busy, digging, reading, cross-checking bylaws and legal loopholes that most homeowners never even knew existed. He had a feeling this wasn't about guidelines. It was about something smaller, pettier, personal, and he wasn't wrong. 2 days later, Jake's mailbox was full of fine notices. HOA board members began knocking on doors, talking to neighbors, stirring fear about non-compliance spreading like weeds. Jake's security cameras caught board members standing outside the guest house, pointing, laughing. But what none of them realized was who they were dealing with. Jake wasn't just a homeowner. He was a licensed architect, a zoning consultant, and thanks to a well-timed crypto exit, dangerously well-funded. Howard had picked the wrong lawn to mess with. The next HOA meeting was supposed to be private, but Jake showed up early, uninvited, wearing a tailored blazer and holding a worn leather binder. He didn't say a word when they tried to keep him out, just handed the security officer a printout. A legal motion, filed, time-stamped, and fully within his rights. He walked in and sat down like he owned the room. The board stared. Howard's smile cracked for the first time. Jake opened his binder and began reading aloud. The HOA's own charter states that if a structure meets municipal code, the HOA must provide written justification of non-compliance within 30 days of notice. It's been 47. Howard sputtered. That's not also, Jake continued, Article 7. Section B, if the HOA fails to maintain common property for more than 6 consecutive months, said property may be offered for private purchase by any dues-paying member. He looked up. I'm placing an offer on the Clubhouse. The room went still, and in that silence, something shifted. Not just in the air. In the power balance of Willow Ridge. Jake stood, adjusted his blazer, and walked out the door. He didn't need to say anything else. He knew the war had just started. But he already owned the battlefield. The news of Jake's offer spread through Willow Ridge like wildfire. By sunrise the next morning, Whispers ran up and down hedged walkways and pristine cul-de-sacs like a gossip freight train. With no brakes. Jake didn't just want to own the clubhouse, he'd submitted a legal petition for immediate purchase, backed by the HOA's own outdated bylaws. The loophole he'd cited had been sitting untouched since 1987, buried beneath layers of neighborhood politics and decades of forgotten amendments. And Howard Thresher, the HOA president who'd weaponized community rules like a toddler with a foam sword. He was sweating. A hastily organized emergency meeting was called at the clubhouse that Saturday. The usual finger foods were their store-bought muffins, lukewarm coffee, and so were the usual suspects, board members, all in their late 50s, with clipboards and permanent frowns. Jake arrived late. On purpose. He walked in wearing sunglasses, holding a large manila envelope, and smiling like he already owned the building. Because, in his mind, he did. Howard stood near the front, cheeks flushed, trying to regain control. "We will not be bullied into selling community property," he said, voice trembling just enough to betray fear. "This clubhouse belongs to the HOA, not to one man." Jake raised a hand. Calm, casual. "I agree," he said. "But it's not really the HOA's clubhouse anymore, is it?" Howard flinched. "Excuse me." Jake opened the envelope and pulled out a packet of photos: water damage, black mold, a leaking roof, broken tiles, faded siding. "Neglect," Jake said plainly. "Documented for over 6 months. This clubhouse hasn't been maintained. That violates Section 7B of your own charter. I've submitted an offer to purchase the building at fair market value, and I'm prepared to match it with renovations that benefit the whole community." Murmurs broke out. Board members glanced at one another. Even Karen Bledsoe, the hard-nosed treasurer who once fined a family for planting tulips instead of roses, looked uneasy. Howard's voice cracked. "You can't just take it." "I'm not taking anything," Jake said. "I'm offering $38,000 as assessed. That's more than it's worth in its current condition." That number hit the room like a fire alarm. Some eyebrows shot up. Others just blinked in disbelief. "38,000, Karen repeated. "For this dump?" Howard turned to her, furious. "It's not a dump. It's community property, which we've let rot for half a year," Jake added. "And if the HOA rejects the offer without cause, I'll file a petition to dissolve the current board under non-compliance and procedural breach. Already drafted, by the way." He slid another envelope across the table. Thick. Heavy. Legal. Howard didn't open it. He didn't need to. The panic on his face said he knew exactly what was inside. "You're trying to dismantle everything this HOA stands for," he hissed. Jake leaned in slightly. "No, Howard, I'm trying to dismantle you." The room fell silent. No more coffee, sipping, no throat clearing. Just an entire board realizing they were about to be outplayed by a man they thought they could bully into submission. One board member cleared her throat. "We'll need time to review the offer." "You've got 10 days, Jake said. "After that, I take it to arbitration and include evidence of systemic mismanagement. And believe me, there's plenty." As Jake turned to leave, Howard called out after him. "This isn't over." Jake paused at the door, just long enough to deliver a quiet grenade. "Sure it is. You just don't know it yet." Outside, Jake slipped into his Jeep, calm as ever. A storm was brewing inside that clubhouse, and he knew it. But he didn't need to fight the storm. He was the storm. And while the HOA scrambled to lawyer up, Jake was already 3 steps ahead, calling contractors, drawing renovation sketches, even printing new signage for the front of the building. But he wasn't just building a clubhouse. He was building a power shift. And the next move, it was going to make the board wish they'd never knocked on his door. 10 days passed, not a peep from the board, not an email, not a phone call, not even one of their infamous passive-aggressive notices slipped into Jake's mailbox. That silence wasn't peace. It was stalling. Jake knew they were panicking behind closed doors, probably calling in favors, scrambling through outdated legal templates, and praying he'd blink first. But Jake didn't blink. Instead, he flew someone in. The woman stepped off the plane in dark sunglasses and a navy blue blazer, like she walked straight out of a courtroom drama. Virginia Donnelly, retired HOA attorney, former federal compliance officer, and Jake's aunt. Most people in Willow Ridge wouldn't have guessed that behind Jake's quiet smile was a family legacy of legal warfare. Virginia didn't waste a second. Within 24 hours, she had binders stacked on Jake's dining room table, maps, HOA newsletters dating back 15 years, budget reports, contractor invoices, maintenance logs, or rather, the embarrassing lack of them. I've seen less. Fraud in city council records, she muttered, flipping pages. Jake leaned over. Think they're hiding something. Oh, definitely, she said. And we're going to drag it out of them like a raccoon from a doghouse. The next HOA meeting was packed. Word had spread through the community about Jake's bid. Residents, who usually kept to themselves, were now showing up with folding chairs and questions. Howard Thresher looked like a man on the edge, dark circles under his eyes, a nervous twitch in his jaw. He barely made it to the podium before Virginia stood up. Point of order, she called, voice smooth but sharp. Before this board discusses property decisions, I request on behalf of my client, Mr. Donnelly, that the financial condition of the clubhouse be disclosed to residents. Howard scoffed. There's nothing to disclose. Oh, Virginia held up a single sheet of paper. Then perhaps you can explain why the HOA has been collecting monthly clubhouse maintenance dues without issuing a contractor repair order in over 14 months. She clicked a remote. A projector screen lit up behind her, showing records, dates, receipts all missing. Guests rippled through the room. Jake stood just behind her, arms crossed, watching Howard's eyes dart like a trapped animal. This wasn't about some zoning preference anymore. This was about mismanagement, corruption. Cover dash-ups. Double quotes. Ms. Donnelly, Howard said, this meeting isn't the proper venue for legal showmanship. Virginia tilted her head. You're right. That's why I've already filed for a community audit and board suspension hearing under state HOA statute. This is just the courtesy preview. The room erupted. Some residents clapped. Others began muttering to each other. The treasurer, Karen, quietly packed up her binder and slid it under the chair. The secretary, gone before the next slide hit the screen. Jake stepped forward and smiled politely. I'll keep this brief. If the board refuses to consider my purchase, offer in good faith, and this misappropriation of community funds is confirmed, you'll be forced to dissolve under statute anyway. He looked directly at Howard. So either you accept the offer and keep some control, or lose it all in court. Howard looked around for support. None. Then something happened. One of the oldest residents, Miss Florence, 84, cane and all raised, her voice from the back. Led the boy by the clubhouse, she said. He's the only one who's actually done anything for this neighborhood. Applause followed. Real applause. And in that moment, Jake knew he wasn't just going to win legally. He was going to win publicly. But he wasn't done. He handed Howard a folder on his way out. Inside was a renovation plan complete with timelines, solar upgrades, community access improvements, and an annual open book budget proposal for all residents, a blueprint for transparency. Jake wasn't just threatening a takeover. He was laying the groundwork to rebuild everything they'd broken. As the board scrambled to regroup, a single truth settled over Willow Ridge. The clubhouse wasn't just a building anymore. It was a symbol. And Jake Donnelly was about to put his name on it. By Monday morning, the neighborhood had turned into a battlefield, but not the kind with noise and chaos. No, this was suburban warfare. Whispered conversations on porch swings. Quiet nods exchanged during morning walks. Facebook groups lighting up with posts like, "Why is the HOA hiding maintenance reports? Did you know Jake offered to renovate the clubhouse for free? I just want to plant lavender without being threatened with a fine." The board thought they could control the story, but Jake had changed the narrative. Residents started showing up at the clubhouse uninvited, unbothered. They walked the halls, saw the moldy ceiling tiles, the water-stained baseboards, the broken AC that hadn't been replaced in years. One mom even brought her toddler in and walked out horrified. Jake didn't say much. He didn't have to. Every problem the board ignored was now a spotlight pointed directly at them. By the end of the week, 3 board members had stepped down. One moved out of the community altogether. Howard Thresher, still standing, but barely. He called for a special closed-door meeting on Thursday. Clearly a last-ditch effort to stop the bleeding. Jake showed up anyway. He wasn't invited. He didn't need to be. He walked in holding a petition. It had 89 signatures, well over the threshold required to force a community-wide vote on his clubhouse offer. "You want to play by the rules, Howard," Jake said as he handed it over. "Let's do it by the book." Howard looked down at the names. Even Florence had signed. So had Karen, the ex-treasurer. His fingers trembled just enough for everyone to notice. Jake didn't wait for a reply. He turned to the dozen residents standing behind him and said clearly, "I'm hosting an open house at the clubhouse this Saturday. Food trucks, live music, lawn games. Let's show this place some life." Then he left, letting the silence choke Howard from behind. The event came faster than anyone expected. By Saturday, the entire cul-de-sac surrounding the clubhouse was filled. Families with folding chairs, neighbors in lawn chairs sipping lemonade, teens tossing frisbees across manicured grass. Jake had paid out of pocket to clean the clubhouse walls, rented portable air conditioners, even hired a jazz quartet from downtown. But the real show wasn't on stage. It was at the voting booth. Set up right next to the hot dog stand. Residents lined up to cast their ballots. Should Jake be allowed to purchase and renovate the clubhouse as outlined in his proposal? Yes or no? Simple. A live count was tallied by 2 neutral volunteers and a retired notary. Howard was nowhere to be seen. But Jake saw his car creep by twice, slowing, watching, hiding. By sunset, the results were clear. 81% voted yes. Gasps, then cheers. A few people actually hugged. Jake didn't smile. Not yet. He stepped forward, tapped the microphone near the stage, and waited until the crowd quieted. "I didn't do this to win," he said. "I did it because this community deserves better than power-hungry bullies who think rules are weapons. This clubhouse belongs to the people who actually live here, not just the ones who want to control it." People clapped. Some shouted his name. Jake raised a hand. "I've already begun renovations. Phase 1 fixing the roof starts Monday." Then he held up a folder. "And Phase 2, a new HOA charter. One where fines require majority votes. Meetings are live-streamed, and nobody gets threatened over the color of their mailbox." That got the loudest cheer of the night. But as Jake stepped off the stage and walked toward the clubhouse doors, a security guard approached. He looked nervous. "Sir," he said quietly, "Mr. Thresher was here earlier. He left this." Jake opened the envelope. Inside was a notice of legal action. Howard was suing to invalidate the vote and block the sale. Jake exhaled. Not surprised, not angry, just more determined than ever. Howard wanted a war. He was about to get one. And this time, Jake wasn't bringing just permits and petitions. He was bringing proof of corruption. Jake didn't flinch when he opened the lawsuit notice. He'd expected Howard to lash out the second he lost control, and Howard was nothing if not predictable. What Howard didn't know was that Jake had been preparing for this moment all along. At sunrise the next morning, Jake and Aunt Virginia sat on the Guesthouse patio with a French press, a binder, and a Bluetooth speaker quietly playing Miles Davis. This is the part where most people get scared, Virginia said, flipping through a stack of HOA emails obtained via a legal request. Jake smiled. Let's give them a reason to wish I had. The lawsuit Howard filed was sloppy, rushed, full of holes, and relying entirely on the claim that the Clubhouse vote wasn't valid. But the real gift wasn't the suit itself. It was what Jake found while reviewing the HOA's financial trail. Tucked into an overlooked line item buried deep in the quarterly expense report was a $14.200 payment to a company called Canopy Solutions, LLC, billed as a landscaping contractor. But Willow Ridge already had a landscaping contract with a different company. For half that cost, Virginia raised her eyebrows when she saw it. Shell company. Jake was already typing. Within hours, he found it. Canopy Solutions was registered in a neighboring county under the name Trent Thresher, Howard's son. They weren't just ignoring maintenance. They were laundering HOA funds through fake companies owned by Howard's family. Jake had struck gold. He didn't call the police, not yet. Instead, he brought the information to the one place Howard couldn't hide from, the next public HOA meeting. It was packed wall to wall. Residents who hadn't attended a single HOA meeting in 10 years suddenly found themselves front row with popcorn. Howard showed up late. He looked thinner, pale, with a necktie pulled so tight it looked like it was choking him from the inside out. Jake stepped to the microphone, calm, unbothered, and held up the check stubs. This is where your HOA dues went last year, he said. To a landscaping firm that doesn't own a mower, doesn't have a website, doesn't even have employees. He clicked a slide, and is run by the president's son. Gasps. Someone cursed under their breath. A man in the second row actually stood up and said, "Are you kidding me?" Howard stammered, but Jake wasn't done. "I've submitted a full report to the county. And if this board doesn't vote to freeze all HOA accounts, immediately pending an independent audit, I'll move forward with filing a criminal complaint on behalf of the Willow Ridge residents." Silence. Thick and suffocating. Then applause. Long. Loud. Unapologetic. Even Karen, the former treasurer, stood and clapped. Then she turned to Howard and said, "You've embarrassed us." Howard stood frozen, eyes darting between his former allies now. Scattered, ashamed, cornered. Jake leaned into the mic one last time. "And if you think the lawsuit's still your ticket out of this mess, I'd rethink that. Because discovery goes both ways. You sue me, I get to subpoena every email you've ever sent with an HOA signature." Howard backed away from the table. He didn't say another word. He didn't have to. He walked out of the clubhouse, and no one followed him. The next day, Jake received a one-line email. "Howard Thresher has resigned from the Willow Ridge HOA board, effective immediately." But Jake didn't celebrate. Not yet. Because removing a rotten head doesn't heal the whole body. He wanted more than resignation. He wanted transformation. So he announced something unexpected. He was running for HOA president, not to gain power, but to hand it back. His plan? A new charter. An HOA that actually worked for the community. No fines without votes. No closed-door meetings. No budget secrets. And definitely no fake lawn companies. At first, some were skeptical. Until Jake opened the Clubhouse the next weekend for a free legal clinic, staffed by volunteer attorneys from his firm's network, helping residents challenge old fines and navigate appeals. He was building trust one action at a time. And quietly, beneath the smiles and good coffee and jazz playlists, he was also preparing something else. Something big. Something final. Howard Thresher resigned in silence, but the damage he'd caused didn't vanish with his necktie. Willow Ridge had been ruled by a board that abused authority for too long, and Jake Donnelly knew one resignation wouldn't fix what had rotted from the inside out. That's why he wasn't done. In fact, Jake had been planning something bigger, way bigger. Behind the scenes, he was drafting something. He called the Willow Ridge Community Reform Charter a full rewrite of the HOA's founding documents, something that hadn't been touched since 1992, when fax machines were still considered modern. Jake's version: transparent governance. All board meetings live-streamed and archived. All financial decisions subject to a resident vote. No unilateral fines. And perhaps the boldest part: term limits. No more lifers on the board. No more people like Howard clinging to power like a badge of honor. To the board's remaining members, it was a revolution. To the community, it was salvation. But revolutions have enemies. 3 days after Jake announced the reform proposal, he received an envelope on his doorstep again. Only this time, it didn't come from Howard. It came from the HOA's attorney, a man named Richard Deeds, who was infamous for protecting failing boards from accountability. Inside the envelope, a cease and desist. They were trying to stop the reform vote by claiming Jake's position as Clubhouse owner created a conflict of interest, that his role gave him undue influence over community decisions. Jake laughed when he read it. Then he called a press conference. Yes, a real one. Right there on the Clubhouse lawn. Cameras, microphones, residents shoulder to shoulder. He opened with the cease-and-desist letter in one hand, and a single sentence: "This is what desperation looks like." He held it up, let the crowd read the header, and dropped it into a portable shredder with a loud whir. "I don't profit from this clubhouse. I maintain it. I rent it out for free community use. And I'm using it right now to give this neighborhood a voice, a real voice." Applause broke out. Someone started chanting his name. He raised his hands. "We vote in 5 days, and no attorney in the world can stop a community from deciding how it wants to be governed." Those 5 days were electric. Jake's reform charter spread through every driveway and inbox. Families gathered in garages to read it aloud. Residents stopped their morning jogs to ask questions, share ideas, offer feedback. And then came Saturday, voting day. Jake didn't host it inside the clubhouse. He hosted it on the lawn, under the sun, with a sound system blasting classic rock and food trucks lined along the curb. The ballot box sat on a table with a sign that read, "You deserve better. Vote like it." And vote they did. 93% turnout. Jake stood near the back as the final ballots were counted. He didn't need to be front and center. Not anymore. When the final number hit the screen, 74% yes to adopt the new charter, he didn't chair. He just smiled and shook hands. He had done what Howard never could. He gave power back to the people. But just when he thought the fight was over, Jake's phone buzzed. A private message. Unknown number. One line. "Don't get too comfortable." Howard wasn't working alone. Jake stared at the screen. His stomach tightened, not from fear, but instinct. Someone else had their hands in this. Someone deeper, quieter, watching from the shadows while Howard took the fall. He looked around at the smiling faces, the neighbors cheering, the kids running around with popsicles, and he realized the war wasn't over. Howard was just the first domino. For the first time in months, Willow Ridge felt alive. The clubhouse lawn had turned into a hub of life, children playing tag, food trucks backing in every weekend, and residents actually smiling at each other instead of ducking behind hedges. To avoid bored gossip, Jake Donnelly had transformed the neighborhood not just with construction plans and legal filings, but with something even rarer in HOA territory: hope. But as with any revolution, peace doesn't last. The text Jake received don't get too comfortable. Howard wasn't working alone. Echoed in his mind like a drumbeat no one else could hear. It came from an untraceable number, and whoever sent it hadn't followed up. Jake kept it quiet. He didn't want to alarm the neighborhood or Virginia, who'd returned home convinced her nephew had brought the HOA to its knees. But something wasn't sitting right. One by one, little things began to shift. First, the clubhouse's internet went down not once, but 4 times in a week. Then, contractors, who had agreed to phase 2 renovations, suddenly backed out, citing unofficial threats from a legal source. Then came the bombshell. A manila envelope showed up at Jake's door. No return address. Inside, scanned copies of emails between former board members and someone named D. Whitmore. Jake froze. He recognized the name Deborah Whitmore, the former HOA legal consultant, someone Jake hadn't thought about in weeks. She never made waves. During Howard's reign, always sitting quietly at board meetings, nodding, typing, never speaking. Most residents had assumed she was just there for technical advice. But as Jake read through the emails, one sentence made his jaw tighten. We let Donnelly think Howard was the brains. Now he's too exposed to stop. What's next? She hadn't just been advising the board. She was engineering everything behind the curtain, with cold precision. Deborah hadn't resigned when Howard did. She had simply vanished on paper. But now she was back. And this time, she wasn't working with the board. She was working for herself. Jake rushed to cross-check her name through the state records system, and there it was. A newly registered LLC. Willow Community Equity Partners. A private entity. And just last week, that entity had submitted a purchase inquiry to the city's zoning board requesting rights to acquire 3 parcels of common HOA green space that bordered Willow Ridge. Space that wasn't protected in the charter yet. Jake's reform had missed it a loophole, and Deborah had pounced. She wasn't interested in control. She was interested in land. Prime parcels. Quiet. Marketable. Worth a fortune if rezoned for commercial or high-density housing. Jake knew what this was now. Howard had been the mask. Deborah was the machine, and she was quietly laying legal traps around Jake's feet, planning to carve up Willow Ridge from underneath him. He called an emergency meeting that night. Residents, newly elected board members, volunteers. He laid out everything: the shell company, the emails, the land purchase moves. Some were stunned. Others were angry. But one face in the room stayed quiet. Jake watched as a man named Tom Willis, the newly elected board secretary, kept his arms folded, expression unreadable. Jake had a gut feeling. After the meeting ended, he pulled Tom aside. "Tell me you didn't know about this," Jake said. Tom didn't answer. He just said, "You should have checked who nominated me," then walked away. Jake's stomach dropped. Deborah had someone on the inside. His board, his vote, his charter. All of it could be weaponized against him if Tom kept feeding her intel. The next morning, the clubhouse security system, brand new, installed just weeks earlier, was wiped. No logs, no backups. Jake knew what this meant. Deborah was coming. Not with a lawsuit, not with a sign in the lawn. She was coming with ownership papers and legal leverage to buy pieces of the community and gut it from within, one parcel at a time. Jake stared out over the lawn that afternoon, watching kids play and neighbors wave like nothing had changed. But it had. The clubhouse wasn't the final battlefield. The land itself was now the prize. And if Jake didn't move fast, the very ground beneath Willow Ridge would belong to someone who never cared about this community. In the first place, Jake Donnelly knew the real war had begun not in the courtroom, not at the clubhouse, but in the soil beneath Willow Ridge. Deborah Whitmore wasn't just trying to take back the HOA. She was trying to own the land it stood on, piece by piece, quietly, legally, permanently. And unless Jake found a way to stop her fast, the neighborhood he'd just saved would be carved up like a pie at a lawyer's brunch. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he pored over county land records, HOA asset registries, easement contracts looking for a foothold. That's when he found it. 30 years ago, a community grant had been issued to Willow Ridge under the Public Land Preservation Agreement, a dusty, forgotten local program. The grant covered the very parcels Deborah now wanted to buy. Buried deep in the clause was a condition, in exchange for receiving funds. The HOA must ensure said parcels remain designated for public recreational or natural use. Transfer or sale to a private entity without 2/3 resident approval shall be void. Boom. Jake's eyes lit up. Deborah hadn't counted on history, and she definitely hadn't counted on someone who read fine print for fun. But he needed more than a loophole. He needed a hammer, one she couldn't ignore. That hammer came from the most unlikely source, Tom Willis, the mole. Jake confronted him in the early morning, near the old willow tree by the park bench. No threats, no yelling. Just one question. Why? Tom hesitated. Then, finally, she had dirt on me. Old business deal. She said if I didn't help her flip the board back, she'd go to the state licensing bureau. Jake nodded. So help me flip her instead. That night, Tom delivered every email, every text, every invoice Deborah had sent him, including one smoking gun, a letter of intent to a developer offering 5 of the HOAS green parcels for commercial rezoning before the board even voted. Jake had her. The next HOA meeting was the most crowded in Willow Ridge history. No muffins, no folding chairs. Just neighbors furious, anxious, and ready. Jake didn't waste time. He projected Deborah's developer offer on the clubhouse wall. The crowd gasped. Then came the emails, the threats, the plans to dissolve the charter, even a backup strategy to replace the HOA with a private management firm she secretly controlled. Deborah, who had shown up confident and smug in a gray power suit, went pale. Her lawyer whispered, then tried to interrupt. Jake raised a hand. You don't need to speak. The residents will. He turned to the crowd. I'm placing a motion to permanently revoke all pending land sales and freeze common property under community trust protected, public, and untransferable without full neighborhood vote. Applause erupted. But Jake wasn't done. And second, I motioned for Deborah Whitmore to be permanently banned from holding any HOA-related legal, advisory, or administrative role within Willow Ridge now and forever. The vote was unanimous. Deborah stood there silent, small, and defeated. As she stormed out, a teenager standing by the door handed her a flyer Jake had printed earlier. It read, "No one person owns this community. Not anymore." In the days that followed, the clubhouse underwent final renovations. The new community trust was signed, sealed, and recorded with the county. The green spaces were safe. The land wasn't going anywhere. And Jake, he stepped down as HOA president. Voluntarily. He handed the gavel to a new board residents voted in under the reformed charter, with transparency at the core. No secrets. No power games. Just neighbors looking out for neighbors. Jake returned to his quiet life. back on his porch with coffee in hand, watching the sunrise over the very guest house they once tried to destroy. He'd fought the HOA, then bought it. Then rebuilt it. And then he let it go. That's what made him dangerous. That's what made him different. And that's what made the HOA finally worth living under. Thanks for watching. If you loved Jake's story and want more HOA takedowns, hit that subscribe. Share it with a neighbor who's ever been fined for a trash bin being slightly visible. And remember, the rules only matter if you let them own you. See you in the next one.